Chapter 22, Nutrition and Digestion. So to start with an overview of animal nutrition. Animals, since we are heterotrophic, must eat other organisms to acquire nutrients, whether those other organisms are plants, or protists, or algae, or animals, or a combination of things. So the food provides the raw building materials needed to build tissues and to fuel cellular work within the animals. So food consists of large complex molecules. Remember the biological molecules like complex carbohydrates and proteins. So those molecules are not in the form that cells can use. The overall strategy is large complex food molecules have to be broken down, that means digested, into their monomer sizes. If you remember things like simple sugars, monosaccharides like glucose, or proteins that get broken down into amino acids. So it's those small molecules that get absorbed into a cell that a cell can use for fuel, like cellular respiration, or building blocks. The amino acids can be linked together to make the proteins that the cells actually need. So the body must break down its ingested nutrients to digest them, both physically, that's the biting part, and the chewing part, and then chemically, with digestive enzymes to break them all the way down to the monomer size, in order to make them useful for the cells in the animals. So let's look at animal diets and how they acquire nutrients. So animals have to eat other organisms, whether they're dead or alive, whole, like swallowing the whole animal, like a bird will swallow an entire fish, for example, or by piece, by chewing. And in order to accomplish that, animals have different tools, like bills or beaks, or teeth, for example. So an animal is an herbivore if it eats mainly plants or algae, so the plant-eating organisms, and their digestive tracts are modified and specialized to deal with plants. Carnivores eat meat from other animals, and again, their digestive system is evolved to eat meat. So these are your carnivores, your consumers, predatory animals. And then omnivores eat both plants and animals. For example, humans are omnivores because we eat a variety of food items, meaning other animals, meat, but also plant material. And because of that, our digestive system is adapted for eating a combination of food items. So let's look at the 4 stages of food processing, from into the body to out of the body. First stage is ingestion. That means placing food into the mouth, where it's normally chewed, solid food, or simply swallowed if it's liquid. So placing food into the mouth is ingestion. That's followed by the breakdown, or digestion. Breakdown of the food into smaller molecules for the body to absorb. And the absorption part occurs in the small intestines, for the most part. So the digestion is mechanical digestion. That means a physical chewing of food in the mouth accomplished by the teeth. And then the churning of the food items in the stomach. So that assists with the chemical digestion, which is through enzymes, those special proteins, or in the saliva in the mouth. So we'll talk about the chemical digestion that begins in the mouth, and then continuing on in the stomach. And then finally, the bulk, most of the chemical digestion occurs in the small intestine, where most of the absorption of the nutrients occurs along the intestinal lining into the bloodstream there, and then the nutrients is now in the body. After that, there is the absorption part, which I was just talking about, the absorption of nutrients and water across the epithelial lining of the stomach into the blood vessels there. and then also water that gets absorbed in the large intestine. So absorption along the small and large intestine of nutrients and water. And then finally, elimination. That's the disposal back out of undigested food items in the form of fecal material, poop. Elimination out of the body, out past the anus. So the 4 basic stages of food processing: ingestion, digestion, mechanical and chemical, absorption, and then elimination. So let's look at digestion. So the breakdown of food molecules is required because initially the food molecules are simply too large to get across the cell membranes along the digestive tract and within the body. And then the food molecules that are acquired from the nutrients, the food that we ingest, are usually different from the molecules that we need at the cellular and tissue and even organ level. So the basic idea is that, for example, cheese, protein, and there's other things in cheese like fat, but cheese protein, right, polymer of amino acids in a specific sequence, that's what you may ingest in your body, and it varies depending on the cheese, but that's what you ingest, and you first mechanically digest it by chewing it up. It gets into the mouth, stomach, small intestine, and then that's where the chemical digestion is really occurring, the bulk of it in the small intestine. So what happens is humans have specific enzymes, digestive enzymes, which are proteins, digestive enzymes that are going to break down, where's my cursor here, sorry, that are going to break down the amino acid sequence of a protein into its monomers, amino acids. Now those smaller molecules are small enough to get across the cell membrane of the cells that are lining the small intestine. So those amino acids get absorbed by the cells in the small intestine. Then they get passed into the blood vessels. And now they are transported by the bloodstream to the other cells in the body that uptake those amino acids as needed. So those are now in the cells. The amino acids, which are the building blocks for a particular protein that that cell needs. So within the cell, then you get the synthesis of proteins, and we talked about that a long time ago, the specific proteins that that specific cell would need. Okay? So those amino acids to build the proteins we need were obtained from the proteins that we ingest and then physically digest and then chemically digest, absorb along the small intestine lining into the bloodstream. Those amino acid building blocks are delivered to the cells, where the cells can now link them together to make what they need. So, to emphasize that, we, in almost all cases, cannot directly at the cellular level utilize the nutrient molecules that we ingest in our body. We have to break everything down to the building blocks. Those building blocks, molecular building blocks, get absorbed at the cell level within the cells, where then they are then linked together to synthesize the particular biological molecules that we need. So the mechanical digestion is that first step. That's the physical chewing within the mouth, accomplished by the teeth, and then the tongue moves the food around so that we can chew it up. When you make a mistake on that, that's when you bite your tongue. So the food is broken down to smaller pieces, first mechanically by chewing. And within the mouth, that food is exposed to the first chemical digestion by digestive enzymes in the saliva we produce. So we have salivary glands in our head, something called the parotid gland just in front of and below the ear, the submandibular gland, which is kind of just below the mandible, and then the sublingual gland, which is just below the tongue. So you have 3 on each side. You have a total of 6, and they all secrete digestive enzymes via the saliva they produce into the mouth by a little duct. And then that saliva lubricates the food, and the saliva has digestive enzymes for fats, lipids, and carbohydrates. So carbohydrate and lipid digestion, chemical digestion, actually does begin in the mouth via the salivary digestive enzymes. And then you chew that up for a while, and then you swallow. And the food then goes into the pharynx, the throat, and then down the esophagus to the stomach. So the chemical digestion is via hydrolysis reactions. If you remember that, at least the name, that's chemical reactions by enzymes that break larger molecules down into smaller molecules by the addition of water. So the addition of a molecule of water along with the enzyme. In this example, it's pepsin enzyme that's first appears in the stomach to break down proteins. So the function of the enzyme pepsin is to break down the chemical bond between the amino acids, called the peptide bond, via hydrolysis reactions, where water is used to break that chemical bond, and then it releases an amino acid, and the enzyme just simply does it again and again and again and again. Amylase, which is in saliva, breaks down carbohydrates, again via hydrolysis reactions. The water comes in, amylase reaction links to the chemical bond between the monosaccharides, the simple sugars, to release them. And then lipase, which is an enzyme for lipids, also first occurs in the mouth. It comes in and via multiple hydrolysis reaction breaks down, in this example, a triglyceride into the glycerol molecule and the separate fatty acids. And then now these things are essentially small enough to be absorbed by the small intestine, the lining of the small intestine, into the bloodstream. So let's look at digestive compartments, areas where digestion is specialized. So the simplest type of digestion occurs at the cellular, unicellular level within an organelle. And we talked about amoeba a while ago, that protists that will ingest an organism or a food particle by entrapping it with its extensions of the plasma membrane called pseudopodia. Once they enclose an organism, it becomes a food vacuole. So then the food vacuole is now within inside the cell, and it's broken down by digestive enzymes. So the cell eats via phagocytosis, cell eating, forming the food vacuole. It fuses with lysosomes. Remember, those organelles carry digestive enzymes, breaking that item down, releasing food molecules into the cell that the cell can then utilize for energy and nutrition. So that's the simplest type of nutrition feeding at the cellular level by single-celled organisms. So it's one example, okay, by phagocytosis. Other organisms, once they get bigger, have more complex digestive processes. We'll look at sponges, which are animals, and they're the only animals that digest their food solely within their cells. So what happens is there's a type of cell that's called a collar cell, or a choanocyte, has a flagellum that's within the structure, the body of a sponge, and it has a flagellum that beats. The cell is stationary and it forms a gentle current that's moving through the structured body of a sponge, and in doing so, what's called a collar traps food particles, and there's actually specialized cells that deliver those food particles to the other cells within the sponge. So a very simple type of feeding by a very simple type of animal. And let's get something that's a little more complex here in the next lecture.